All right, everyone, let's get started. Thank you so much for coming. This is the sound of Hyperlight Drifter. My name is Akash Thakkar. So before we get started, before we do anything, I'm just going to play a trailer from the game for you, for any of you who aren't familiar with the game, and then we'll move on. All right, so I'm coming to, oh, thank you. We only have 25 minutes, no clapping, we gotta keep this. All right, so I'm coming to you today with a simple message, and that is that the purpose of sound design is emotional impact. Nothing else. That's the purpose of audio in all of your guys' games. So it doesn't mean that you need to make your players cry every single time they match 3 in Bejeweled. That's not what I mean. But what I do mean is that you need to get some sort of reaction out of every bit of audio, music or sound or voiceover, whatever's in there. It can be everything from the footsteps all the way to the sword sounds to the explosions. It could say, hey, player, go over there, or avoid that area, look over here. You should think about this, that sort of thing. You can basically force them to pay attention to different effects based on this emotional impact. And that's how I approached Hyperlight Drifter. Everything from the footsteps to the little voiceover lines to the monsters had to elicit some sort of emotional response from the player. So before we go on, just a little bit about me. I'm a composer and sound designer for video games, did Hyperlight Drifter, did some music work on Destiny recently, gave a TEDx talk on the power of video game music, and I'm a professor of game audio at the Seattle Film Institute, where I'm based, and also do a lot of virtual reality stuff now. So what we're covering in this talk is the sound design process, so how it was made, just a little tidbits on that, how I worked remotely with the Heart Machine team. I'm based in Seattle, everyone else was in Los Angeles, and for those of you who aren't audio designers, tips for working with audio professionals, because we have the most weird, intangible part of the whole game development spectrum. So the Heart Machine team, the people who made Hyperlight Drifter, was around 10 people, and I say around because we had contractors come in and out throughout the whole project, mostly based, again, in Los Angeles, California, and I worked from my home office in Seattle, Washington, so all along the West Coast, but we were definitely a remote team. And the audio team consisted of myself and the composer who was Disasterpiece for this game. He also was working remotely. He worked in his studio in Berkeley, California, so we all had a bit of a remote environment, especially for audio. So the workflow between all this remote stuff that was going on was Slack, of course, which is the best thing ever. Slack was our best friend. Asana and Workflowy were used for assigning tasks. A lot of you probably know what Asana is. Workflowy is a little less known. If you don't know about Workflowy, it's the best thing ever. It's just a whole bunch of bullet-pointed lists, and that's it. It's amazing. But I actually, thanks to Workflowy and its simple UI, now I use it every single day to manage my own personal life. It's phenomenal, and it allows you to share tasks with other people and have different lists. It's so good. It's so good. Now, one of the most important things with working remotely is having weekly check-ins with the creative director. So Alex Preston was the creative director on Hyperlight Drifter. And really important thing to do was to have every Tuesday we blocked off at least an hour and had weekly check-ins. Even if neither of us had updates for one another, we still made sure to have a habit of saying, hey, what's up? Nothing. Okay, great. Talk to you next week. Every single week, because one, a lot of you who are remote workers know that a lot of studios will forget about you like that. It's super easy to just be forgotten about if you're not in studio. So this made it so that one, I wasn't forgotten about, and two, if any major updates were being planned, I was in on it very quickly and very easily. If they're planning on removing or adding an entirely new feature, if they were planning on adding a new monster, whatever it may be, I was in the loop, and I could let Alex know, okay, here's the audio planes that I have. And he might say like, oh no, don't do that, that feature's not in anymore. It's thanks to those weekly check-ins, so I didn't waste a whole bunch of time. Now, a lot of people ask me if Disasterpiece and I interfaced about the music and sound for this game, and honestly, no. Disasterpiece and I have known each other for about 6 or 7 years now, so we went to school together. So I think we just gelled. I'm not saying that your composers and sound designers shouldn't talk to each other. That's the opposite of what they should be doing. But in this situation, over the course of the 3-year development, he and I talked maybe 3 times of just, hey, can you avoid the bass frequencies here? I'm going to do some high frequency stuff here. Can you add bird chanting to my track? Yes, that was a conversation that happened. That's the only stuff that we covered because our styles gel anyway, and we happen to know each other before the project. So, the whole design process of this was that sound design is all about experimentation. The artists in the room know exactly what I'm talking about. The programmers in the room know exactly what I'm talking about. Game development is nothing more than a whole bunch of people failing upwards until something happens. That's all it is. So it's a miracle games get made at all, and sound design is probably the most experimenty of all of that. So many of the sounds didn't make it into the game at all. I think total I designed about 560, and only about 300 some went into the game. But that's totally normal. That's part of this process, because as the game develops, as other people fail, you're going to do it too, and you're going to kind of fail together upwards until you get that final vision realized, and that's what happened with this game. Now, in terms of process, what I did was layer a whole bunch of sounds together. I'm going to show you a video of what that means in a second. But every single sound you hear in that game, and most games in general that have decent sound, the sound designer is layering or putting a whole bunch of sounds on top of each other to create one unique thing. So this video I'm about to show you is in Logic Pro, the sound design tool that I used for this project. I've since moved on, but I used Logic Pro for this one. And what you can see here is one sword sound effect. And it's made up of 15 different other sounds that all come together to make just one sword sound. So in total, I made crazy, crazy, crazy amounts of sound, combined them together, and it made something unique in the end. Now, what this video is me walking you through every single layer and playing them all one by one, and then you'll hear them all together in the end. Now all together. So it takes a lot of time and effort to make just one single sword sound effect, but that's how every single sound in this game was made. Not all of them were 15 layers, some of them were just 3 or 4, but not one of them was just one sound. Every single thing was just crammed together, and sometimes I was just like, let's see what happens if I put a tiger growl in here. Who's to say? And it's a miracle people pay us for this. So to get those sounds that I just showed you, I had some special gear. So one thing that I used was a wire recorder, which I'm going to show you from the 1950s. And the other thing was a stethoscope that I turned into a microphone. Now that nobody's confused, let's move on. So the wire recorder, let's show that first, and then I'll talk about the stethoscope. So I used this thing, which is a recording device from the 1950s that came out before tape. It was invented basically right before World War II and phased out right afterwards in 1953 when tape was invented. So what it is it records onto this thin metal wire that's like fishing wire. It's super tiny, and the instruction manual that came with it is like, hey, the wire's gonna snap for sure. It's totally gonna snap. When it does, just tie the wire back together. Great, awesome, sweet. So you can record directly onto this wire, and the cool thing is, because it's metal, the sound never degrades. So when I got this from some happy guy in Florida off of eBay for like $200, well worth it. It came with a whole bunch of spools of recordings from people from World War II. His father and son talking about their experiences during the war. Some guy just playing a ripping marimba solo for 20 minutes. 2 little girls learning the piano for the first time. I have all of these recordings thanks to this thing, and they're all original, and I digitized it. It's fantastic. So to show you a video of this thing in action, I have like a 15-second video of what sorts of stuff this came with and what it sounds like. So it's the instant Bioshock Fallout 3 machine. It's fantastic. It's so good. Well worth it. That was just a snippet. It came with hours and hours and hours. I think total I have like 26 hours of stuff like that recorded. It overheats in 10 minutes. It makes a horrible humming sound after 5. You have to unplug it and replug it in because it's probably going to set fire. It took forever to digitize it all, but well worth it. So in terms of how I used it in the game, we have an antagonist in Hyperlight Drifter named Hal, and you're going to see his GIF looping right there. So he's probably the main antagonist of the game. He's this awful enemy that's super powerful and can kill you just ridiculously quickly. So we needed him to sound completely different from all the other monsters. Now, I used the wire recorder for every single monster in the game, and by the way, the angelic voice you're hearing right now is every single monster in the game. And I recorded myself squelching and screeching into this wire recorder to get interesting, unique sounds. This one needed to not sound like a regular growl, not a regular roar, not a regular monster. We needed something that was spine-tingling and crazy and weird. So I recorded myself squealing like this awful pig, like into the wire recorder, and then put it into Logic and stretched it out and made it insane and weird. And here's the result I got. So that's, again, this through the wire recorder. So thanks to that, I could get some really crazy sounds. Now, next up is the stethoscope, this beautiful work of art you see right here. So what I did was take a stethoscope, I cut off the little ear thingies, and what I did then was take that pipe and basically put it through a garden hose spigot. Tape that together, put the microphone on the other side of that garden hose spigot, tape it together, and then have a cord, like just a standard XLR cable, going into my portable recording device. And that way I could record things like blood, the conversations on other sides of windows, normal everyday stuff, no problem. So, fun fact, I use this for a lot of the ambiences in the game. So there's one ambience that's actually my blood. I just put it up to my wrist, and it's this low, guttural, bubbly thing. So one of the bosses actually has blood ambience in it. I think it's called like bloodambience.wave, which is fantastic. So now I can officially say that you're all listening to my blood whenever you play that game, which is great. But also I use this to record things like my freezer and putting it against the floor to get the rumble of the city, all sorts of stuff. So one example I'm about to play for you is me recording my freezer. Now, normally, when you open a fridge or freezer, you see this kind of rumbling noise, right? Now, recorded with a stethoscope, when I just put it right up against the wall, you get a really interesting sound. So what you're about to hear is the sound of a freezer just with a little bit of equalizer on it, and that's it. Pretty neat, right? So I use this thing all the time for ambiences. That sounded kind of nice and heavenly and pretty cool. So I use this all the time. I was that weirdo walking around going like this to things, just like, no, it's fine, it's fine. Pro tip for sound designers, by the way, in the room who do field recording, buy a construction vest with like the orange and yellow stripes. No one will bother you. So I put down traffic cones, I wear the construction vest, and I just record stuff. Even police have walked by me like, hello, and nothing. It's totally great. Everyone assumes you're supposed to be there, so pro tip for all of you, just buy one off of Amazon. No one will bother you. You can walk in anywhere. So, the whole process, almost nothing was right on the first try. So I don't want to give you any illusions. I got up to version 40 on some of these sound effects. That's okay. That's totally fine. Tons of revisions are made. Again, version 40 I think is the highest number, but there were some sound effects that just gave me nightmares, and I'm going to show you a few in a second. So good feedback was really crucial to this. It was really crucial to get good feedback from Alex Preston, the creative director. And good feedback is really descriptive, emotional words. Hey, I want this to sound lonely. I want this to sound dark. I want this to sound nightmarish. That's great. What I've also had in the past is, hey, make this sound blue. Or I've even had one client say, hey, I need this to sound... And he did this thing with his mouth. So it took me 2 months to find out that meant aggressive. Terrible feedback. That's the worst. Never do that. But always give emotional and descriptive words. And lastly, always test your sounds in-game. This is crucially important. Something that sounds perfect on its own, and you think you can imagine it in your head like, oh yeah, I think that would work, might sound terrible in-game, and vice versa. There have been times where the sound on its own in Dropbox, like, oh, I'll just check this out, sounded terrible. But in the game, it was perfect. So you never know. Always, 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 always test your sound and music in-game. So all this early failure led to great success. I was brought on at the very beginning of the game, and that's what I recommend you do for all your audio people. Bring them in at the beginning, which is most common, bringing them in really, really late, because it allows them to fail with you and fail upwards with you and make those same experimentations that you're making. So one video I'm about to show you is based on health sound effects. So I'm going to just show you a quick video. I just swapped out the health sounds, and I'm going to show you version 1, 3, 5, 9, and 11. I'm not going to show you all 11. And you're going to hear how some of them just don't fit, but it started to gel as time went on. And that last one is the one we eventually ended up deciding on. So it took some time, but it worked out in the end because I had those 3 years to play around and experiment. Now, next up is a video that that's taken about 1.5 years into the development cycle. So this is when the game's sounds start to gel. Again, it took 1.5 years. All right, and next up is a video of the game when it was released with all of its sound design in. You're going to hear some ambiances, the sound's a little more refined, the dash sounds better, little things like that. Also does a cool sword spinning. Oh, I love that. All right, so some of my favorite effects in terms of audio effects and plugins and all that sort of stuff were Logic's Bit Crusher, and a bit crusher is basically something that lops off or cuts off a bunch of bits of your sound, which can make it sound really old school or distorted in this really cool, unpleasant way, which I used a ton on Hyperlight Drifter to get this nice static to everything. Reverb, which I think is the fairy dust of the audio world. Put it on everything, it's great. Just put more reverb on if you have a problem. Not actually, but that's... My favorite reverb is Audio Damage's EOS reverb. It has an infinite setting, so I turn on infinite, I hit go, I make a sandwich, I come back and have this crazy warped effect. It's fantastic. And lastly, Native Instruments' Absinthe is this insane synthesizer that allows you to kind of do anything so long as it's weird. It allows you to make really strange sci-fi and otherworldly effects very, very straightforwardly and very easily, so I use this a ton for Hyperlight. Now, just some few tips for working with audio professionals before we finish up. Hire early. Again, get them early so they can fail upwards with you, because that's all game development is. And when you don't get them early, which is all too common, you rob them of the ability to grow with the team and create with the rest of the team, which is probably what you actually want, because then you'll get the best result possible. Establish common terms. This is really important. Make sure that what you're saying and what the audio people are saying mean the same thing, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. And expect iteration. Obviously, nothing's going to be right on the first try. Again, version 40 for some sound effects. And get a style guide. So this will help you establish common terms. A style guide can be a concept piece of music, which is pretty common, but you can also get concept sound design. What I like to do for clients is give a 1 to 2 minute audio demonstration, essentially, of here's what I think the game will sound like. It has everything from combat in there, it has ambiances, everything else is in that 1 to 2 minutes, so that if you close your eyes, you can almost imagine yourself playing a game. And then from there, you'll hear the developer or creative director, whoever it may be, say things like, oh, I like that, that sounds in tune, or that sounds really dark. I don't think I want this game to sound really dark. And you're just nodding and taking all these terms and be like, okay, dark means this. And then you start to realize what they're saying, what they really mean when they're talking about audio, because it's such an intangible thing, it's very hard to describe, and everyone has their own unique way of describing it. For example, for Hyperlight Drifter, sorry, Alex, so when he said, hey, this sounds really out of tune, he actually meant, this sounds really in tune. If I played something perfectly pitched on the piano, he's like, no, I don't like it, it's out of tune. But if I played something that was out of tune, like really pitched warped, he's like, I like that, that's in tune, that's nice. So I would have never known that if it wasn't for that style guide early on, and that would have killed months of development, because I would have kept making like in-tune stuff, and he's like, nope, it's out of tune. Why? It's like, oh, okay, it turns out your ears are super weird and you have a weird way of describing this. But thanks to the style guide, it was very easy and very straightforward to do all of that. So we blazed through this in under 25 minutes. Yes, thank you all so much. You can feel free to ask questions, and I'll be hanging out during the conference and all that sort of good stuff. Here's all my stuff. So if anyone has questions, we have a couple minutes, so feel free to ask.
How did you get involved with Alex Preston?
Yes, so how I got involved with the project in general is I actually saw it go up on Kickstarter. So I got in right after the Kickstarter finished, and I literally emailed him, was like, hey, I'll do good. That was it. I wish I had the email for you because it's literally one line, and I actually teach other people how to break into the game. It's like, don't write long emails. You'll never get a gig. But I was like, hey, can I do it? I'll do good. Okay. That was it. That was the end of it. No one else was emailing it. Everyone was like, here's my reel. Oh, I can't wait to work. I was just like, I'll do a good job. I had no reel, no website, no nothing. So I'm kind of a weirdo in that way. Anything else? We have time for maybe one or two more.
Are you involved in like middleware, like Fmod or yeah?
Yeah, so am I involved in middleware like Fmod or Wise? Yeah. So for this project, we didn't have any. It was made in GameMaker, which has the worst audio engine ever. But with other projects like Unity, Unreal, any other engine, or just custom engines, yeah, I use Fmod and Wise very heavily whenever I get a chance. For those of you who don't know, Fmod and Wise are pieces of middleware that allow non-programmers like me to create interactive sound and music within games, set up the logic so that the programmer just needs to hook it up really quickly and really easily and call it good. Anything else?
How would you go about sound design in a game with a relatively low budget? Because you talked about buying, the wire recorder, which was $200 and things like that. So how would you go about that in a low budget game?
Yeah, totally. So you don't need to buy this sort of equipment. I was able to, so that's why I did it, and it sounded cool. But for low budget games, if you're doing sound design for low budget games, honestly, a very cheap and easy way is to either A, if you're not a sound designer, you can buy a sound design library for this type of stuff that you need, or B, you can hire someone who is good at recording their own stuff. So most sound designers have some sort of microphone setup that they can use, and you can record all that stuff at home. Unless you're getting something really strange like tigers or gunshots, which actually you can find on the internet pretty easily, then you'll be able to record most of it on your own, and that's a really good low budget way to go about it. So libraries and recording it yourself using some sort of setup are good ways to go about it. All right, thank you all so much. I'll be hanging out, so if you want to chat more, feel free to ask. Thanks.